Part 1. The Child of Muro Lucano. In the little town of Muro Lucano, among the hills of southern Italy, there was born a child whose life would look small to the eyes of the world, but immense to the eyes of heaven. His name was Gerard Majella. He came into the world on the 6th April 1726, in a house marked not by riches, not by honor, not by comfort, but by poverty, labor, prayer, and the quiet courage of ordinary people. His father, Domenico Majella, was a tailor. His hands were used to thread, cloth, needle, and patient work. His mother, Benedetta Galella, was a woman of deep faith, the kind of mother who carried worry and silence and prayer in her heart. Gerard was the youngest of 5 children, and from the first days of his life he seemed fragile. Those who saw him could have thought that such a child would not last long. He was weak in body, delicate, and often sick. Yet in that frail body, God seemed to hide a burning soul. The world teaches children to become strong by taking, defending, competing, and winning. Gerard learned another kind of strength. He learned to receive. He learned to suffer without bitterness. He learned to pray before he learned to explain himself. He learned that the poor have only one treasure that cannot be stolen from them: the presence of God. As a child, Gerard was drawn to prayer with a tenderness that seemed beyond his years. While other children ran through the streets with loud voices and restless feet, he often slipped away to a small chapel near his home. There, before the image of the Blessed Mother holding the child Jesus, he would kneel in silence. He was not performing piety for adults. He was not pretending to be holy. He was a child who had found a door into another world. Tradition tells one of the most beloved stories of his childhood. When Gerard was about 5 years old, he would return home from the chapel carrying a small white loaf of bread. His mother, seeing the bread, asked him where he had found it. He answered with the simple seriousness of a child. A beautiful boy had given it to him. To an adult mind, such an answer might sound like imagination. To a mother living in poverty, it might also sound like a mystery. Where could a poor child obtain bread again and again? Who was this beautiful boy? Why did Gerard speak of him without fear and without pride, as if the event were ordinary? One day, his sister Elizabeth followed him quietly. She wanted to see what happened in the chapel. She watched him kneel before the image of Mary and the child Jesus. Then, according to the old account, she saw a wonder. The child Jesus came down from the arms of his mother and played with little Gerard. After a time, the child gave him bread. Then he returned to the arms of Mary. This story is not merely sweet. It reveals the deep pattern of Gerard's whole life. Heaven did not appear to him as a theory. God did not remain for him a distant ruler, cold and unreachable to Gerard. Jesus was living, near, humble, and tender. Jesus could come down. Jesus could play. Jesus could feed a hungry child, and Gerard, who would later feed the poor, multiply bread, console mothers, and draw sinners back to mercy, first learned all of it from the small hands of the child. Jesus, there is another grace, remembered from his youth. His first Holy Communion, which tradition connects with the help of the Archangel Michael. Whether one reads this account as devotional memory or sacred wonder, it fits the inner truth of his life. Gerard did not treat the Eucharist as a custom. He loved it as a living fire. Later, when he was unjustly deprived of communion because of a false accusation, the pain was so deep that it felt like a wound in the center of his soul. But the roots of that love began early. From childhood, he seemed to understand that the altar was not decoration, but encounter. Then sorrow entered his home. When Gerard was 12, his father died. The death of Domenico changed everything. Poverty no longer stood outside the door. It entered the house and sat at the table. Gerard had to leave school and work. His mother placed him with a tailor so he could learn his father's trade. This was not a romantic apprenticeship. It was hard, humiliating, and painful. The master may have valued him, but the foreman treated him cruelly. Blows, insults, roughness, and injustice became part of his daily life. Many people become hard when life strikes them. They begin to strike back at the world. Gerard did not become hard. He became deeper. He learned the terrible art of suffering without hatred. Once it is said, he smiled while being beaten. When someone asked why he smiled, he answered that he saw the hand of God. Such words can be misunderstood. Gerard was not loving cruelty. He was not calling evil good. He was looking through the cruelty and refusing to let it poison his soul. He believed that even what others meant for harm could become, in God's hands, a hidden school of holiness. This was one of his first great miracles. Though people do not always call it a miracle, to raise the dead is marvelous. To walk upon water is astonishing. To multiply bread is glorious. But to be humiliated and not become bitter, to be wounded and not become cruel, to be poor and still give, To be misunderstood and still trust God, that too is a miracle. In Gerard, this miracle was happening quietly long before the famous wonders began. After his apprenticeship, Gerard served for a time in the house of the Bishop of Lacedonia. The bishop had a difficult temperament. The household was not easy. Gerard served, endured, obeyed, and prayed. He did not seek a stage. He did not ask to be admired. He carried the small tasks of the house as if they were offerings placed on an altar. During this period, one of his early miracles took place. One day, the key of the house fell into a well. In a practical world, a lost key means trouble, expense, frustration, and blame. People may have stood around the well helplessly, looking down into darkness. Gerard did something childlike and daring. He lowered a small statue of the child Jesus into the well. Those who saw him may have thought him naive. What can a statue do? What can prayer do? What can simplicity do against the hard facts of water, stone, depth, and loss? But Gerard raised the statue, and the key was held in its hand. The story is beautiful because it is so Gerard. He did not command heaven like a magician. He did not make a spectacle of power. He trusted like a child, the same child. Jesus, who in the old memory of his youth had given him bread, now returned the key. The miracle was small compared with storms and deathbeds, but it carried a message. Nothing is too ordinary for God. A key, a loaf, a poor family, a tired mother, a sinner afraid of confession, a fisherman in a storm, a young man falsely accused, all these could become places where grace entered. Gerard's early life was therefore not a preparation separate from his holiness. It was already his holiness. He learned poverty by being poor. He learned obedience by serving. He learned compassion by suffering. He learned trust by having almost nothing except God. He learned the hidden language of heaven, not in universities, but in kitchens, workshops, chapels, sick rooms, and the narrow streets of a poor town. The child of Muro Lucano had no sign of worldly greatness. He owned no land, held no title, commanded no army, wrote no famous philosophy, and built no institution in his own name. But inside him the kingdom of God was growing like a flame covered by ashes. People saw a weak boy. Heaven saw a saint being formed. Part 2. The young worker who wanted only God. As Gerard grew older, one desire became stronger than all the others. He wanted to belong completely to God. Not partly, not occasionally, not only on feast days, not only in prayer, but in everything. He wanted his hands, his work, his poverty, his hunger, his body, his future, his humiliations, and his whole will to be offered to God. Yet the road to religious life did not open easily. His body was frail. He did not appear useful. Religious communities looked at him and saw weakness. He tried to enter religious life, but he was refused. The refusal was practical. A sickly young man seemed unable to bear the discipline, labor, and demands of community life. From the outside, it may have seemed reasonable to reject him. From the inside, each rejection must have cut deeply. But Gerard's vocation was not a passing emotion. It was not youthful excitement. It was a wound of love. He felt drawn to God with a force stronger than disappointment. When doors closed, he did not abandon the call. He waited, prayed, worked, and tried again. After the death of the bishop he had served, Gerard returned to tailoring. He worked first for others, and then on his own. He earned little, but even the little did not remain only for him. He shared with his mother, with the poor, and with the souls for whom he prayed. This detail matters. Poverty often tempts people to clutch every coin. Gerard did the opposite. He gave from scarcity, not from abundance. He did not wait to be rich before becoming generous. He made generosity the proof that money was not his God. The poor recognized him because he belonged to them. He was not a benefactor looking down from comfort. He knew the texture of hunger, the fatigue of labor, and the humiliation of need. When he gave bread, he knew what bread meant. When he gave comfort, he knew what sorrow felt like. When he later became known as Father of the Poor, that title came not from office, but from love. In 1749, a mission was preached in Muro by the redemptorists, the congregation of the Most Holy Redeemer. The redemptorists were a young religious congregation, founded to preach the gospel especially to the poor and neglected. Their preaching stirred Gerard's soul. He saw in them the life he desired: prayer, mission, sacrifice, closeness to the poor, and total dedication to God. He begged to join them. Once again, his frail health stood against him. Those responsible did not think he could endure the rigors of religious life. They were not cruel, they were cautious. But Gerard's determination made caution look small. When the missionaries prepared to leave Muro, they feared Gerard might follow them. His mother, advised to keep him home, locked him in his room. To many young men, a locked room would be an ending. To Gerard, it became a passage. The next morning, his mother found the room empty. The window was open. A sheet hung down like a poor man's ladder. Gerard had left a note saying he had gone to become a saint. There is something almost startling in that sentence. He did not say he had gone to become important. He did not say he had gone to escape poverty. He did not say he had gone to find an easier life. He had gone to become a saint, not in pride, but in clarity. He understood the only ambition worth having. He caught up with the missionaries. Imagine the scene. A thin young man, exhausted from pursuit, begging men who had already refused him. He had no impressive recommendation, no physical strength to display, no social influence to offer. At last, Father Paul Cafaro yielded and sent him to a redemptorist house with a note that described him as a useless lay brother. History loves such moments because God loves to overturn human measurements. The one called useless would become one of the most beloved redemptorist saints. The one judged too weak would do the work of several men. The one thought unfit would become a sign of heroic obedience, burning charity, and astonishing miracles. This is not sentimental, it is a warning against shallow judgment. Human beings usually measure by surface: health, money, status, polish, productivity, voice, appearance. God measures by surrender. Gerard entered the Redemptorist community and began the life of a lay brother. He was not a priest. He did not preach from pulpits like the great missionaries. His work was practical and humble. He served as tailor, gardener, sacristan, porter, cook, carpenter, and helper in many tasks. He collected alms for the community. He assisted the missionaries. He worked in the background, but in the kingdom of God, background is not the same as insignificance. The hidden worker may be closer to heaven than the visible speaker. Gerard's holiness did not need a pulpit because his whole life preached. The way he opened a door, patched a garment, carried food, cleaned a room, obeyed an order, listened to a poor person, or knelt before the Blessed Sacrament became a sermon. On 16 July 1752, after his time of formation, he professed his religious vows. To the usual vows, he added a private resolution: to do always what seemed to him most perfect. This was not perfectionism in the modern sense. It was not anxiety, vanity, or a need to control. It meant that Gerard wanted to choose the thing most pleasing to God in each moment. If silence was better than self-defense, he would choose silence. If humiliation was allowed by God, he would endure it. If charity required fatigue, he would spend himself. If obedience cut against his own preference, he would obey. Saint Alphonsus Liguori, founder of the Redemptorists, came to regard Gerard as a miracle of obedience. This obedience was not mechanical. It was not fear-based submission. It was spiritual attention. Gerard seemed able not only to obey commands spoken directly, but even to sense the desires of his superiors when they were absent. Accounts say that he sometimes appeared or acted in answer to needs that had not been formally communicated to him. In him, obedience had become listening so deep that it touched the edge of mystery. His prayer was continual. He could be working with his hands while his heart rested in God. For Gerard, prayer was not an escape from labor. It was the soul of labor. He did not divide life into sacred and ordinary. All was sacred when done in the will of God. A broom, a needle, a kitchen pot, a door latch, a basket of bread, a poor man's request, a superior's instruction, all could become holy. People began to notice. The poor came to him. Sinners came to him. Anxious souls came to him. Those ashamed of their sins found in him a strange courage. He could speak with tenderness, but also with piercing truth. It was said that he could read hearts. People who had hidden sins, especially sins they feared to confess, found themselves gently but firmly exposed. Gerard did not expose them to humiliate them. He exposed the wound so it could be healed. This gift of reading souls is one of the most powerful graces associated with his life. It was not curiosity. He was not interested in secrets for their own sake. He was interested in salvation. A person can carry a hidden sin for years, wrapped in fear, pride, shame, and self-deception. The sin becomes a locked room inside the soul. Gerard, through a grace people could not explain, seemed to see the locked door. Then he would speak in such a way that the person understood. God already knows, God still calls, and mercy is waiting. Many returned to confession because of him. This is why he is also invoked by those seeking good confessions. He knew that a bad confession, a dishonest confession, or a confession in which the central wound remains hidden, can keep the soul trapped. He wanted people free, not socially respectable, not merely calm or free. Yet his holiness remained hidden under work, sickness, and humility. He had no interest in building a reputation. The more people praised him, the more he fled inward toward God. He did not want miracles to become entertainment. He did not want gifts to become a throne. He wanted only the will of God. That phrase, the will of God, became the center of his life. To many people, the will of God sounds like resignation, passivity, or defeat. For Gerard, it was fire. It was the one place where the soul becomes unbreakable. If God wanted work, he worked. If God allowed sickness, he suffered. If God sent consolation, he received it. If God permitted accusation, he stayed silent. His freedom came from no longer belonging to himself. This is the severe beauty of Gerard Majella. He was gentle but not weak, humble but not empty, obedient but not mindless, poor but not small, sickly but not useless, hidden but not insignificant. He became powerful because he stopped trying to possess power. He became fruitful because he stopped trying to possess himself. Part 3. The Saint Among the Poor and the Miracles of Daily Mercy. After Gerard became a redemptorist brother, his life began to move outward. He traveled with missionaries, assisted in missions, served communities, visited families, collected alms, and carried the presence of God into the rough places of ordinary life. He was still young, still frail, still without worldly rank, but people were drawn to him as dry ground is drawn to rain. The poor especially trusted him. They sensed that he was not performing compassion. He did not speak to them, like a superior soul distributing advice. He entered their suffering with them. He knew their hunger, their debts, their shame, their patched clothing, their fear of winter, their dependence on harvest, their need for bread. In his presence, the poor did not feel like problems to be managed. They felt seen. One of the beautiful traditions about him tells of a poor family with only a small supply of wheat. In a world without modern security, a little wheat could mean the difference between survival and hunger. When the supply was gone, children would cry, parents would panic, and the future would become a wall. Gerard blessed the wheat, and according to the story, it lasted until the next harvest. The miracle is often told simply, but imagine the slow wonder of it. A mother opens the container one morning, expecting almost nothing. There is enough. She returns the next day, fearful that the blessing has ended. Still there is enough. Day after day, the measure does not match the anxiety. The poor family begins to live in a strange school of trust. They do not become rich. They do not receive barns overflowing with luxury. They receive enough. Enough for today. Enough for tomorrow. Enough until the earth gives again. That is often how God's mercy appears in the lives of the poor. Not always as abundance, but as endurance. Not always as escape, but as daily bread. The miracle of the wheat says that God does not despise household fear. He knows the terror of an empty jar. He knows the weight of a mother's calculation, the father's helplessness, the child's hunger. Gerard's blessing made visible what faith proclaims. Providence can enter a poor kitchen. Another beloved miracle tells of bread multiplied for the poor. Gerard would distribute bread, and more than once, the bread seemed to be enough for far more people than it should have fed. Again, one can imagine the scene. People gathered because hunger had gathered them first. Some came embarrassed, some desperate, some with children at their side. Bread was placed into hands. One person received, then another, and the baskets should have emptied, but still there was bread. The miracle of multiplied bread is not only about food, it is about the refusal of heaven to accept the mathematics of despair. Despair says there is not enough, so protect yourself. Charity says give, and God will decide the measure. Gerard did not give because he had calculated certainty. He gave because love had become stronger than fear. In his hands, bread became a sacrament of compassion. People also remembered a miracle involving a boy who had fallen from a high cliff. The child was believed to have died. The grief of such a moment is almost unspeakable. A fall, a cry, a body broken by stone, and then silence. A family's future collapses in a single instant. Neighbors gather. Someone runs. Someone weeps. Someone prays without words, because words have become useless. Tradition says Gerard restored the boy to life. This is one of the miracles that made people speak of him with awe, but to understand the story devotionally, one must stay near the grief. It was not a display of power for a crowd. It was mercy, entering the most brutal fact of human life, death taking a child. If the story is told too quickly, it becomes only a marvel. If it is told slowly, it becomes a cry answered. The boy's mother, father, relatives, and neighbors would have passed through the black doorway of loss, then suddenly found themselves standing in light. The child breathed, the eyes opened. The body once given to mourning was returned to embrace. Such stories explain why ordinary people loved Gerard with a fierce love. They did not love him as an idea. They loved him because through him, heaven seemed to bend low over their actual pain. There is also the story of the storm and the fishermen. One day, fishermen were caught in dangerous waters. The waves were violent, the boat threatened, and death moved close. Anyone who has seen a storm at sea knows how quickly human confidence disappears. A boat that seemed solid becomes a leaf. Strong men become small. The shore looks near and unreachable. Voices are torn away by wind. Fear enters the bones. Tradition says Gerard walked across the water to guide the fishermen safely to shore. This miracle echoes the gospel, but it has its own tenderness. Gerard was not showing that he possessed mastery over nature. For himself, he was going to the endangered. He was crossing what others could not cross. He was making a road over chaos. The fishermen, seeing him, would have seen not merely a man on water, but a sign that God had not abandoned them to the storm. He became for that moment a living bridge between terror and safety. Many of Gerard's miracles involved nature, bread, wheat, water, sickness, and the physical world. This is important. Holiness in him was not abstract. It did not float above matter. It touched bodies, food, weather, houses, keys, childbirth, wounds, and death. Christian faith is not disgusted by the material world. God made flesh holy by becoming flesh. Gerard's miracles declare that grace can pass through the ordinary things people touch every day. But perhaps the most searching miracles were not outward. They were the miracles of the soul. Gerard was known for bringing sinners to repentance. People came to him with guarded faces and hidden histories. They thought their secrets were buried, but Gerard sometimes spoke with uncanny precision about sins they had concealed. He did not need accusation. A few words were enough. A person would understand that the saint had seen into the heart. This could have been terrifying. Yet for those who received it rightly, it was mercy. The hidden sin loses power when brought into light. Shame says if anyone knew, I would be destroyed. Mercy says God knows already and still offers forgiveness. Gerard's gift helped people cross the bridge from shame to confession. Imagine a man who had avoided confession for years because one sin remained too humiliating to name. Every time he approached the sacrament, fear closed his throat. He confessed smaller sins, safer sins, sins that allowed him to keep his image. But the central wound remained. Then he met Gerard. The brother looked at him not with suspicion, but with sadness and love. He spoke softly of what the man had never said. The man trembled, the wall cracked. Tears came, confession became true. The soul, long trapped, breathed again. Such a miracle may not impress the eyes like walking on water, but in heaven it may shine even brighter. A soul restored to grace is a resurrection. A confession made honestly, after years of fear, is a dead man leaving a tomb. Gerard also had the gift of prophecy. He could speak of future things, sometimes with simple certainty. He did not use this gift for curiosity. He did not create drama. He spoke when charity required it. Prophecy in the saints is not fortune-telling. It is participation in God's concern for souls. It warns, consoles, prepares, and calls people back to the truth. He was also associated with bilocation, the mysterious grace of being seen or heard in two places. Accounts say that he could appear where obedience or charity required him, even when physically elsewhere. Such a gift seems impossible to ordinary reason. Yet in the logic of sanctity, the deeper truth is this. Gerard belonged so completely to God that distance itself seemed less absolute around him. Love moved him where he was needed. At times he fell into ecstasy. While meditating on God, his body was said to rise from the ground. Levitation can fascinate people, but the heart of the event is not height. The heart is attraction. Gerard's soul was drawn toward God with such intensity that even his body seemed to follow. What people saw externally was only a sign of what had already happened internally. His center of gravity had changed. Earth no longer held him in the usual way, because heaven had become his true weight. Yet after such wonders, he returned to work. This is the mark of genuine holiness. Miracle did not free him from washing, carrying, sewing, obeying, begging, cooking, or serving. He did not become theatrical. He remained Brother Gerard. If bread multiplied, he still distributed it. If souls were converted, he still prayed. If people praised him, he still humbled himself. If heaven lifted him, he still returned to the floor. There is a brutal lesson here for anyone who wants spiritual gifts without purification. Gifts do not make a saint, humility does. Miracles without humility become danger. Power without obedience becomes poison. Insight without charity becomes cruelty. Gerard's extraordinary graces were safe because he considered himself nothing. He did not grasp at them. He received them and handed them back to God. The poor understood this. That is why they kept coming. Not because Gerard had spectacle, but because he had love. In his presence, the hungry found bread, the guilty found confession, the terrified found courage, the sick found prayer, and the abandoned found a sign that God had not forgotten them. Part 4. The false accusation and the silence of the innocent. True holiness is not proven only by miracles. It is proven by the cross. Anyone can appear devout when praised. Anyone can speak of trust when life is gentle. But when reputation is destroyed, when the innocent are accused, when obedience becomes bitter, when God seems silent, then the soul's real structure is revealed. Gerard's great trial came through a false accusation. The story is painful because it touches one of the deepest human fears. To be accused of evil one did not commit and not be believed. During his apostolic work, Gerard helped young women who desired religious life. Among them was Neria Caggiano. She entered a convent but soon left. Needing to protect herself from shame and criticism, she began to spread falsehoods. Eventually, she accused Gerard of grave impurity. The accusation reached Saint Alphonsus Liguori, Gerard's superior. For a religious brother known for purity, prayer, and holiness, such an accusation was devastating. Reputation is fragile. One letter, one rumor, one malicious word can stain years of virtue in the minds of others. People who yesterday called someone holy may tomorrow whisper suspicion. The innocent person stands trapped. To defend oneself can look self-serving. To remain silent can look guilty. Gerard was called to answer. He stood before authority. He could have explained. He could have denied. He could have exposed the lie. He could have named the contradictions. He could have defended his honor. Instead, he remained silent. Why? Not because truth did not matter. Not because slander is harmless. Not because false accusation should always be ignored. His silence came from a particular spiritual obedience. He saw in the humiliation a share in the silence of Christ before accusers. He trusted that God could defend him when God wished. He chose not to save himself by force. This silence is almost unbearable to modern ears. Modern life teaches self-assertion as survival. If accused, respond immediately. Control the narrative. Protect the brand. Destroy the lie before it destroys you. Sometimes that is necessary. Justice matters. Truth matters. But Gerard's silence reveals another possibility. A soul so surrendered that even reputation is not possessed as private property. Saint Alphonsus, faced with Gerard's silence, imposed severe restrictions. Gerard was forbidden contact with outsiders. Worst of all, he was deprived of Holy Communion. This was the sharpest wound. For Gerard, Holy Communion was not a symbol of social belonging, it was his life. To be kept from receiving the Eucharist pierced him more deeply than public shame. He could bear being judged. He could bear being confined. He could bear being misunderstood. But the hunger for Jesus in the sacrament burned in him like fire. The pain became so intense that he feared serving Mass. He was afraid that his longing might become so strong that he would reach for the consecrated host from the priest's hands. This detail shows the depth of his Eucharistic love. Many people receive communion casually. Gerard, when deprived of it, felt the absence like starvation, yet he obeyed. He did not rebel. He did not manipulate sympathy. He did not gather supporters. He did not secretly violate the restriction. He did not turn his suffering into self-pity. He accepted the penance and remained faithful. Here, one sees a miracle more difficult than multiplying bread. The innocent man did not become resentful. The falsely accused did not become cynical. The soul deprived of its deepest consolation did not curse authority. Gerard's holiness passed through fire and did not turn into smoke. What happened in him during those days? No one can fully know, but one can imagine the nights he knelt alone. Outside, people may have wondered about him. Some may have believed the accusation. Others may have been confused. Within the community, suspicion may have hung in the air. Gerard carried the burden silently. He could have prayed, Lord, you know, that may have been enough. He could have offered his name, his pain, his hunger, and his humiliation for sinners. He could have united himself to Christ accused, mocked, stripped, and silent. Every day without communion may have become an inner crucifixion. Every act of obedience may have become a nail. Then the truth emerged. Neria became dangerously ill and confessed that the accusation was false. She admitted that the charges had been fabricated. Gerard was vindicated. Most people, after such vindication, would feel triumph. They would want apologies. They would want public correction. They would want those who doubted them to feel shame. They would replay the injustice and demand moral repayment. Gerard did not do this. He had not collapsed when accused, and he did not exalt himself when cleared. Whether humiliated or vindicated, he saw only the will of God. This is why Saint Alphonsus could recognize his sanctity. Gerard's innocence was not merely moral, it was spiritual. He did not cling to innocence as ego. He offered even innocence to God. The false accusation also helps explain why Gerard became a patron of falsely accused people. He knows the horror of being misrepresented. He knows what it means to have one's name darkened by another's lie. He knows the helplessness of standing before authority while the truth is hidden. Those who suffer slander can turn to him not only because he was innocent, but because he suffered innocence in a holy way. Yet there is another layer. After this trial, his connection with mothers and children seems to deepen in the devotional memory of the Church. He had been accused through a story involving impurity and pregnancy. Later, he would become known as a protector of mothers, women in childbirth, unborn children, and family life. The wound became a channel of mercy. What was used to destroy his reputation became, in God's providence, part of the path by which countless mothers would seek his intercession. This is one of God's strangest patterns. The enemy throws mud, and God grows lilies from it. A false accusation becomes a source of compassion. Humiliation becomes authority. Suffering becomes intercession. The saint who was denied justice becomes a helper of those in danger. The brother accused through a lie becomes a guardian invoked in the truth of childbirth. Gerard's silence must not be turned into a weapon against victims of injustice. Not everyone is called to silence in the same way. Sometimes truth must be spoken loudly. Sometimes accusation must be answered. Sometimes institutions must be challenged. But Gerard's silence remains a radical witness. There exists a freedom beyond reputation. A person who belongs wholly to God cannot be finally owned by praise or blame. The world says, defend your name because your name is your life. Gerard says, God is my life. The world says, if people misunderstand you, you are ruined. Gerard says, if God knows I am held. The world says humiliation is death. Gerard says humiliation can become union with Christ. That is not weakness, it is terrifying strength. Part 5. The Mother's Saint and the Handkerchief of Mercy. Among all the graces associated with Gerard Majella, none has entered the hearts of ordinary people more tenderly than his intercession for mothers, expectant mothers, women in childbirth, and unborn children. He is known in many places as the Mother's Saint. This title did not come from theory. It came from stories, prayers, dangers, births, tears, and answered petitions. The central story begins quietly, almost accidentally. Near the end of his life, Gerard visited the Pirofalo family, friends who welcomed him with affection. As he left their home, he dropped his handkerchief. One of the daughters noticed it and ran after him to return it. Gerard, with a prophetic simplicity, told her to keep it, because one day it would be useful to her. Nothing dramatic happened at that moment. No thunder, no shining light, no crowd, only a handkerchief, a young girl, and a sentence whose meaning remained hidden. But in the life of saints, small objects can become vessels of grace. Not because cloth has power by itself, but because God loves to work through humble things: water, oil, bread, touch, tears, relics, hands, words, and memory. Years passed. The girl became a married woman. Then came the hour of childbirth. In that period, childbirth often carried grave danger. Mothers and infants could die suddenly. Medical help was limited. Fear entered homes with the labor pains. A woman giving birth stood at the border between life and death, joy and terror. Families prayed because they knew how little control they possessed. During her labor, danger rose. She was on the edge of death. The child was in danger too. The room must have filled with fear. Those around her may have whispered prayers. Perhaps someone ran for help. Perhaps the woman's pain became unbearable. In that crisis, she remembered Gerard's words. Keep it, because one day it will be useful. The handkerchief was brought. Almost immediately, according to the tradition, the danger passed. The pains calmed. The mother was delivered safely. A healthy child was born. The story spread, not as a theological argument, but as a cry of gratitude. A mother had lived, a child had lived. Gerard, already known for many wonders, became linked forever with childbirth. The handkerchief became a sign that his compassion reached into the most vulnerable moment of family life. Why did this miracle touch so many hearts? Because childbirth is not abstract. It is blood, breath, fear, exhaustion, hope, and love. A mother in danger does not need a theory of providence. She needs help. A father standing helpless beside her does not need a lecture. He needs mercy. A family waiting outside a room does not need decorative piety. They need God to draw near. Gerard's intercession became, for countless families, a way of asking heaven to draw near. Many mothers have prayed to him in pregnancy. Some prayed after years of longing for a child. Some prayed during difficult labor. Some prayed when doctors feared for the baby. Some prayed after miscarriages, grief, or repeated disappointment. Some prayed not for a dramatic miracle, but for strength, calm, acceptance, and protection. Devotion to Gerard grew because people believed he listened with the heart of someone who had suffered and understood. There is another story from his life in which a mother and unborn child were in danger, and through his prayers both came safely through the ordeal. This is not merely repetition, it shows a pattern. Gerard's charity turned instinctively toward the vulnerable. The poor, the hungry, the falsely accused, the ashamed sinner, the sick, the frightened mother, the unborn child who could not speak. In this sense, his title as patron of mothers is not separate from the rest of his life. It is the flowering of his whole spirituality. He protected life because he belonged to the God of life. He comforted mothers because he had learned from Mary and the child Jesus. He cared for hidden life in the womb because his own life had been hidden, fragile, and underestimated. He helped those in danger because he had spent his own life standing where human strength runs out. The handkerchief story also reveals how grace often waits. When Gerard told the girl to keep it, the purpose was not immediate. Years had to pass. The word was planted before the crisis came. This is often how God prepares mercy. A prayer learned in childhood becomes strength in old age. A blessing received casually becomes hope during illness. A saint's name heard once becomes a lifeline in danger. A small object kept in a drawer becomes a reminder that heaven is not forgotten. From this story, many devotional practices grew. People asked for blessings. Mothers carried medals or images of Saint Gerard. Families prayed novenas. Churches honored him. Women in pregnancy turned to him with confidence. Couples longing for children asked his intercession. Those who had lost children brought their grief to him. He became not a distant saint of marble, but a companion in the intimate anxieties of the home. Yet devotion to Gerard must be understood with spiritual seriousness. He is not a machine for obtaining outcomes. The saints are not substitutes for God, nor are prayers guarantees that suffering will disappear exactly as we wish. Gerard himself lived in surrender to the will of God. His whole life says, ask boldly, trust deeply, and surrender completely. That is the true shape of his intercession. When a mother prays to Saint Gerard, the deepest prayer is not magic, it is communion. Saint Gerard, you who loved God's will, pray that this mother and child be protected. Saint Gerard, you who help the poor and the helpless, stand near this family. Saint Gerard, you who knew suffering without bitterness, bring peace into this room. Saint Gerard, you who trusted God in darkness, teach us to trust. Some graces are visible, safe delivery, recovery, healing, unexpected help. Other graces are hidden, courage, endurance, acceptance, reconciliation, the strength to carry grief, the peace to place a child in God's hands. Gerard's miracles include both. Heaven's greatest gifts are not always the ones that can be photographed or counted. The mother's saint also speaks to a world that often treats life as manageable, only when convenient. Gerard's devotions says that every vulnerable life matters. The unborn child matters, the exhausted mother matters, the poor family matters, the frightened father matters, the body matters, the home matters, hidden suffering matters, prayer in a small room matters. It is no accident that the saint of mothers was a lay brother, not a famous ruler. Mothers live much of their heroism hidden. Pregnancy is hidden. Labor is hidden. Grief is often hidden. Postpartum fear is hidden. The daily sacrifices of family life are hidden. Gerard understands hidden holiness, he lived it. His miracles for mothers became famous after his death. But they were consistent with the man he had already become. As a child, he received bread from the child Jesus. As a worker, he gave to the poor. As a brother, he carried burdens no one saw. As an accused innocent, he suffered silently. As a miracle worker, he served rather than displayed power. As the mother's saint, he continues that same pattern. Hidden help, humble signs. Life protected where fear is strongest. The handkerchief is therefore more than a relic story. It is a symbol of Gerard's whole mission. A small cloth, almost forgotten, becomes a channel of mercy. A simple word spoken years earlier becomes prophecy. A mother near death becomes a witness to hope. A child born safely becomes a living thanksgiving. And a poor, frail brother from Muro Lucano becomes known across the world as a friend of mothers. Part 6. Sickness, Death, Glory, and the Saint Who Still Listens. Gerard's life as a redemptorist lasted only a few years. By worldly standards, it was brief, almost incomplete. He died at 29. Many people at that age are still searching for direction, building a career, testing ambitions, or beginning their public work. Gerard had already burned through a whole lifetime of holiness. His body, always frail, began to fail. In 1755, sickness struck him severely. He suffered violent illness, including hemorrhages and dysentery. Death seemed near. Those around him knew that his strength was almost gone. Yet even in sickness, his obedience remained astonishing. His director, wanting to test or exercise obedience, commanded him to recover if it were God's will. Immediately, according to the tradition, Gerard seemed to improve. He left his bed and returned to the community. This temporary recovery was itself remembered as a miracle. But Gerard understood that it would not last. He knew, with the quiet certainty of the saints, that death was near. This episode shows the strange power of obedience in his life. Gerard had obeyed in work, humiliation, accusation, and deprivation. Now, even sickness seemed to bend before obedience, but only for a time. He did not cling to the temporary recovery. He did not interpret it as permission to escape death. He received it, worked while he could, and then returned to the bed where God was waiting. As death approached, Gerard placed a sign on the door of his room. It expressed the center of his soul. Here the will of God is done, as God wills, and as long as God wills. These words are not decorative, they are a final self-portrait. In that room, there was pain. There was weakness, there was the slow stripping away of bodily life. There were friends and brothers who loved him. There was the knowledge that his time was short, and over all of it stood the will of God. To many, the will of God is frightening, because it means losing control. To Gerard, it was home. He had spent his life practicing for this final surrender. Every insult endured, every poor person served, every command obeyed, every temptation to self-defense resisted, every sickness accepted, every miracle handed back to God, all of it had trained him to die freely. He did not die as a victim of meaninglessness. He died as an offering in the night between 15 October and 16 October, 1755. Gerard Majella passed from this life at Mater Domini. He was 29 years old. The young brother whose body had seemed too weak for religious life had become a giant of sanctity. The one once recommended as useless had become a wonder worker. The hidden worker had become a light for the poor, mothers, sinners, and the falsely accused. At his death, the sacristan, moved by emotion, rang the bell as if for a feast, rather than tolling it as for a death. This detail is unforgettable. The bell itself seemed to misunderstand death because holiness had changed the meaning of the hour. The community had lost a brother, but heaven had gained a saint. Grief and triumph stood together. For ordinary death, the bell mourns. For a saint, even sorrow has music in it. People came in great numbers to see his body. They wanted to touch, remember, receive, and keep some small sign of the one who had helped them. This may seem excessive to modern skepticism, but love behaves this way. When someone has been a channel of grace, people do not want abstraction. They want nearness, a piece of cloth, a memory, a prayer, a place, a grave, a story. These become ways of holding on to hope. After his death, reports of miracles continued. Mothers prayed. Families prayed. The sick prayed. The poor prayed. Those who had been helped told others. Devotion spread. His fame did not fade with burial, because it had never been based on personality alone. It was rooted in intercession. People believed that Gerard, now with God, continued to care. In 1893, Pope Leo XIII declared him blessed. In 1904, Pope Pius X canonized him as a saint. The Church, after examination and devotion, placed his name before the faithful. But the poor had called him a saint long before formal recognition. Mothers in danger had known where to turn. Sinners had remembered his gaze. Redemptorists had remembered his obedience. Families had remembered the bread, the wheat, the handkerchief, the storm, the confessions, and the strange nearness of heaven around him. His shrine at Mater Domini became a place of pilgrimage. People came not because Gerard had been powerful in the worldly sense, but because he had been transparent. Through him, they glimpsed God's compassion. What does his life say now? It says that weakness is not uselessness. Gerard was rejected because of poor health, yet his weakness became the vessel of God's strength. It says that poverty is not abandonment. He was born poor, worked hard, gave what little he had, and became father of the poor. It says that hidden work matters. He cooked, sewed, carried, opened doors, begged alms, assisted missionaries, and sanctified ordinary tasks. It says that miracles are not entertainment, they are mercy. The key in the well, the wheat, the bread, the boy restored, the fisherman guided, the mother saved. All point not to spectacle, but to compassion. It says that confession is liberation. Gerard's gift of reading hearts was not for shame, but for healing. He wanted souls to stop hiding from mercy. It says that silence can be powerful. Falsely accused, he did not collapse into hatred. He allowed God to defend him. It says that mothers are not alone. In the terror of childbirth, in the fragility of pregnancy, in the longing for children, in the grief and hope of family life, Gerard remains a companion of prayer. Above all, his life says that holiness is total surrender to the will of God. Not passive fatalism, not laziness, not emotional escape, but active, burning surrender. Gerard did not float through life, he worked. He suffered, he prayed, he obeyed, he served, he walked into storms. He stood beside mothers, he faced slander, he carried sickness. Surrender made him more alive, not less. For a reading voice, his life can be heard as a long movement from hiddenness to glory. The child in the chapel receives bread, the apprentice endures blows. The young worker gives to the poor. The rejected applicant escapes through a window to follow his vocation. The useless lay brother becomes a servant of many. The miracle worker multiplies bread and reads souls. The innocent man remains silent under accusation. The friend of mothers leaves behind a handkerchief of mercy. The dying saint writes the will of God on his door. The bell rings as for a feast. The world receives a saint. Saint Gerard Majella did not live long, but he lived completely. His years were few, but they were dense with grace. His body was weak, but his charity was strong. His name was almost destroyed by slander, but God made it a refuge for the falsely accused. His hands were poor, but through them bread multiplied. His life was hidden, but through him countless families found hope. And even now, those who love him do not remember him as a distant figure locked in the past. They speak to him as one who listens. A mother whispers his name before childbirth. A couple longing for a child asks his prayer. A person carrying false accusations seeks his courage. A penitent afraid of confession asks his help. A poor family asks for daily bread. A sick person asks for strength. A soul confused by suffering asks to understand the will of God. Gerard's answer, if his life itself could speak, would be simple. Trust God, do the will of God, give what you have. Hide yourself in prayer. Do not fear poverty if charity remains. Do not fear weakness if obedience remains. Do not fear slander if truth remains in God. Do not fear death if the will of God is your home. This is the story of Saint Gerard Majella, a poor child, a hidden brother, a miracle worker, a friend of mothers, a servant of the poor, a lover of the Eucharist, a silent innocent, and a saint whose small life became a wide door of mercy.